Oh, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Getting Real with Paula. My name is Paula Alphonse, and tonight we're going to talk about a topic that is dear to my heart: setting boundaries. More specifically, the why, the when, and with whom should we set boundaries. So, some of you might say, but why should we set boundaries? Everybody knows. Funny part is, we show every single day other people how they should treat us. The challenge we have oftentimes is that we are totally unaware of what we're sending out, and then we're surprised by the result we get. So the boundaries will help you let people know how you want them to treat you. At the root, boundaries will ensure that in any relationships that you are in, that the interaction you have is one, mutually respectful, appropriate, as well as supportive. But enough of a teaser. Tonight, I have a guest, Aneet Bassi, who will share her journey with setting boundaries. Aneet, over to
Hi,
you. I will ask you to introduce yourself and then tell us how you relate to tonight's topic.
sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Aneet Bassi. I am a disability management professional. I've been in the disability management field for about the past 17 years. I think I just aged myself. Um, and I've been working in both the public and the private sector. So I've got a little bit of experience with both. Tonight's show about setting boundaries is really important because this was something that I really struggled with. And I found that the more I struggled with doing this, the less I was able to be successful in whatever it was that I was trying to do, because I would try to kind of be everywhere at all places, all times, and it just wasn't working for me. So that's why today's show is really important for me, because I feel like it took me a long time to get here. And if I can help people with some shortcuts, more power to you.
Thank you. If I was to ask you, what is the link to you between mental health and setting boundaries? What comes to mind?
I would say that setting boundaries is a way for you to listen to your feelings. It's a way for you to ensure that you're not pouring from an empty cup. I'm sure we've all heard that metaphor of you can't give what you don't
Mhm.
have. And when you're constantly pouring into a bunch of different cups, then you realize that you have nothing left. And if you can't give anything to yourself, then you're really no good to anyone else either.
Mhm. What I'm hearing with what you're saying is really from the perspective that oftentimes we are going through the busy cycle of life and we take care of everybody. And
Absolutely.
then all of a sudden it's just like, where am I? How come nobody pays attention to my needs? Why is it that everybody wants a little piece of me, but nobody wants to give me any piece?
And also,
So
what is it
for
that I
me,
want? What is
go
it that
ahead.
I need? If you're so focused on everybody else, you don't know what you need.
And it's a huge challenge nowadays. And I will bring another element or another layer to the conversation. Do you think that being a female actually makes it easier or harder to set boundaries?
I definitely feel like it makes it harder. I think that being female from a very young age, we're groomed to be good girls, and good girls are kind and generous and helpful, and they're always there for everybody, and they're selfless. And so when you're constantly perpetuating that narrative, you're basically telling girls that everyone else is more important, everyone else's needs come before your needs, and your only value is if you're able to provide for somebody else.
Mhm. And it's a good point. I know in my culture, of course, I was raised the same way you were mentioning, which is the portion of, oh my God, you're supposed to be a nice person. You don't answer when they ask you a question. You say thank you. If they give you a compliment, even if you don't like the compliment, it's
Yeah,
thank you. So there's those little things where, as female, we're meant to take care of everybody else. And then when we start having kids, start working outside, start taking more of a role, whether it's our small cluster of a family or a large cluster of a family, then this is where we run into some of those challenges, which is everybody's more important. And then I'm sending that message on a regular basis. And when people don't reply back, it feels as though, oh, something's wrong with me.
absolutely. I think that
In
as
that,
women, we're constantly
yeah.
told to be something and do something, otherwise we're not going to be living up to a standard, and it's an impossible standard. We're supposed to work as if we don't have families. We're supposed to have families as if we don't work. And I mean, I've chosen the path of putting my career over having a family, and it's very much an enigma in my culture because it's not something that's expected of me.
Hmm.
But that's a
Cultural
boundary for me.
expectations.
Yeah, that's a boundary for me, right? Like I've chosen a certain life, I've chosen a certain path, and I expect people that are in my life to respect that. And when they don't, then it feels like I don't need that type of energy around me.
Hmm. So, when do you set a boundaries? How do you know when it's time for you to set a boundary?
If I'm interacting with somebody and that interaction just leaves me drained, as you can tell, I'm quite open. I like to talk a lot. And so when I can engage with somebody else and I leave that interaction feeling energized and feeling like, oh, this is a new point of view that I've obtained, or this is a new way of approaching a problem, stuff like that really energizes me. But on the flip side, if I leave somebody and I'm like, what was that? Like, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I'm a little bit more
Mhm.
negative, that's when I know I need to set a boundary and say, okay, this person, like as much as I appreciate having them with me, maybe this isn't the right time for
Mhm.
me to have this much interaction with them. And so then I set that boundary of saying, okay, I'm going to make a conscious effort not to allow that into my days as much as I can. Right. Well, and it may be the fact that I say to that person, look, I get that you're going through something right now and it's heavy and it's hard and I'm here for you, but I just can't be there for you in this aspect.
Is this a process that is different when you do it in your personal life versus work life?
Absolutely. I feel like my
Do you
personal life, I can be less diplomatic if I want to and get away with it. And people are just like, that's just how she is, right? I have a little bit more leeway there. Whereas professionally,
okay?
there are constricts and there are boundaries that are already in place, and you have to figure out how to work within them and still have your needs met, and still be a productive team player, and still be an asset to the cog in the wheel, and
Mhm.
still be able to put that forward while still taking care of yourself. And that's very difficult to do when you're in a organization that doesn't appreciate that.
Mhm. It's interesting because when I think to my own life experience, I usually know when I need to set a boundary, and from a perspective that I either feel violated, mistreated,
Yeah.
or disrespected.
Yeah.
And that applies both at work or at home.
Hmm.
And it could be as silly as somebody that is standing way too close to you in a bus, or it could be people asking you questions that are way too personal for the relationship that we have,
Absolutely.
or even someone trying to tell you or order you around, and you're thinking, hello, you're not my mother, you're not my father, what you think you're doing? And for most of us, we would know that a line has been crossed just
Absolutely.
because of the discomfort
Yeah.
or confusion that the behavior has created. You've mentioned some examples of boundaries that you've established. Can you give me the reason why it came about? Let's just say something you've done at work and something you've done at home, but concrete examples that people could say, oh, is that what that was about?
So an easy work example is there was a position that I was in where I'm very much a doer. I'm very much task oriented. I like to have lists. I like to have little ticky boxes of I've accomplished this today. It's a good thing. It's a good feeling for me. One of the downsides of being a doer is that people tend to then task you with things that maybe aren't part of your role. And they just kind of get used to, oh, okay, well, we don't know where to put this. Oh, let's get them to do it, or let's get her to do it. She's always looking for things to do. And that was great in the beginning, but then it turned into, well, now I've got to put my work aside and do this, and I'm not able to give 100% of my attention here, and I'm not able to give 100% of my attention there, and it wasn't appreciated. So it made me feel as if I wasn't doing something right, and it wasn't giving me the satisfaction that I needed to do my job. And I'm one of those types of people that if I'm not satisfied, I can't give you quality. I can't give you quality work. And my work and my name means a lot to me. And so I don't want to put my name to something that is substandard.
And in that situation, what did you end up doing? Did you speak to the person? Did you ask for assistance? Did you explain?
I tried to go in a roundabout way, which probably wasn't the best approach because it just it didn't leave anything spoken where there was a resolution. And so I tried to go in a roundabout way first, then I tried to go directly through, which also was taken as being too aggressive. So then I had to come back and say, okay, I'm not trying to blow bridges up here. Like, I need to cross these bridges at some point in my life again. So I'm not trying to break that bond there, but I need to be able to say to people, look, my work comes first. And if I have the opportunity, if I have the time, I will put my time towards this. It turned out to be taken in a way of, oh, well, they don't want to help, or she doesn't want to help anymore. She just wants to focus on herself. And it was almost as if I was being selfish at that point, but I wasn't. I was trying to give quality work. And at the end of it, I ended up just looking for other opportunities and saying, okay, well, I think I've kind of hit a ceiling here where I'm not being fulfilled. I'm not giving what I need in order to be successful in this role. So I think I should just look elsewhere and see what else I can do.
I find it interesting because my experience in the work environment, and I've traveled, I've worked in all kinds of environment, both in Canada and outside of Canada, both from the public sector as well as the private sector. And there's always this discomfort when, and I'm speaking as a female. I don't know with a male if it's going to be the same, but there's always this discomfort when a female puts her foot down, and then there's this sense that something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And the for me, it goes back to the way we were raised, where we're not supposed to make wave. You're just supposed to go with the flow and things like that. But that usually doesn't get you to your results. And sometimes it's figuring out how do we get to that specific issue. I remember at one point I had at that time I had young kids, and I was a single parent at the time, and my children were sick. And I remember this one manager that was excellent, but excellent in understanding what my reality was and accepting those boundaries that I put in terms of I have to be at work between this time and this time. Past this certain time, it's not going to work. And it went really well. Fast forward a few years, and this time we're facing the same situation. It's a female person who also has kids, but the behavior was, I'm sorry, needs to be done. And for me, that was okay. So if you cannot respect my boundaries, then I guess I will have to outline it very clearly so that it can be done. And it's unfortunate because sometimes in the work environment, because we don't say things as they are, because we're not maybe clarifying the understanding, because oftentimes it could be misunderstanding. It could be different priorities, and then how can we find resolution? But it's those elements. How do we get to that specific conversation? If you were to think about the people with whom you've had to put boundaries, what comes to mind, or who comes to mind?
I would say, I think relatives to start off with, family and relatives, only because they're the ones that feel like they don't have to respect a boundary, or that there shouldn't be a boundary because you're family, right?
Mm-hmm.
When in your professional life, there's still that element of, okay, I'm not related to you, you're not my friend, you're a coworker. And so there's still a certain
Mm-hmm.
level of decorum there. Whereas with family, I feel like that just goes out the window. Like an example of setting boundaries, which I really didn't think of until recently. It's as a culture, we're very affectionate. So if we go to someone's house, we'll greet you with a hug, and there's a lot of contact. And I have a niece who absolutely hates to be hugged, does not like it, does not does not appreciate it, but she's not able to vocalize it. She's not able to say, I don't like this, please don't touch me, because it would be considered very rude. And so when she comes across these situations, I find, and she's very tall, and so people are generally just like, oh, she's pretty much an adult, but she's not. She's 13, she's little, she doesn't want that type of contact. And so I started to become a buffer for her and say, okay, how about we try fist bumps, or how about we try handshakes? And it was very awkward for people because they weren't used to that type of a boundary. And they couldn't understand why someone so cute and so adorable wouldn't want a hug. And it's like, well, not all cute people want a hug. Just like when I was little, people would pinch my cheeks, irritate me to no end. But I couldn't say no. And I'd look to my mom, or I'd look to my grandparents, and they'd be smiling and laughing. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is just a me thing. But it wasn't a me thing. It was don't touch me. Like, I don't like that boundary. I don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very hard to vocalize for me at that age. So it was very easy for me to see her issues with it now. And so we try this when people come over, right? We have them do handshakes, or we'll have her say hello from afar. And it may be considered rude, but people thinking she's rude, and her mental health of, I no longer have this anxiety when people come over, I no longer, palms don't sweat, my heart doesn't race, that means more to me than other people's opinions. So I will continue doing that.
Yeah. And thinking about who do we set boundaries with, for me, in my mind, definitely there was the relatives. There were some of the friends,
Mm-hmm.
could even be a spouse.
Absolutely.
Had to every now and then put either boss or colleagues in a specific conversation in order to address some elements. And sometimes it's strangers because some people just don't know what their limits are. And last thing is, and that's the part that was the toughest for me, is setting boundaries for myself.
Yeah.
Because as you said, there would be things that you didn't appreciate, you didn't like, or but regardless, with respect to your environment, with respect to your family structure, with respect to your culture, there's certain things we tolerated. And then you get to a point in your journey where it's just like, often when you see single women, and I've seen that both at work and in the private life, where people keep asking, so when are you going to get married? And you're like, have I asked you about your plans in this regard? So why are you asking? And there it feels like a joke to some, but the funny part is most women are getting married way later than they've ever done. And sometimes they might even choose, I don't want to get married. So
Absolutely.
how do I have those conversations? And those are boundaries that you have to set so that people can stop, please stop minding my business, take care of yours, I'll take care of mine.
Or another comment
And
will be, do you have any kids? How many kids do you have? And then when I have to explain, well, I've chosen not to have children, but I have 3 nieces and nephews that I'm very much involved with
mhm.
in life. And they're like, oh, so you're like part-time parenting. And I'm like, no, I'm I'm not part-time parenting. Like, my sister is
So they're deciding for you. Yeah.
parents. I was like, I'm just
Yeah.
heavily involved in their life. But they
And
don't
that's a
see that
choice.
as being odd.
Yeah. It was interesting for me at one point. I was having a conversation with someone, and I have dogs, which is a small little thing. It's nothing surprising in life. And for me, what's truly important is to walk my dog every morning. And if I can, I do it at the end of the day as well. Some people say, but you should stay in bed. Why do you let this dog determine what you do? And I'm like, the dog is not determining. I made a choice. I
Yeah,
took a responsibility, and I've decided that's part of those things that I want to keep doing. And it's not always similar from one family to the next, from one co-worker to the next. And how do we get them to understand what works for you? Fine, might not work for me, and that's okay too. So my motto here is often live and let live. I might not understand all of those things that you consider important for yourself,
absolutely. Yeah.
but you don't have to transfer those.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's
If I was to ask you,
is just understanding a different point of view and being open to a different point of view. You don't
yeah,
have to agree with it, but just being open to
no,
hearing what it is.
and then decide where your bubble ends and where mine starts.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were to leave our audience with 2 or 3 key messages with respect to setting boundaries, what would those messages be for you?
Setting boundaries is difficult. You may not succeed the first time you try, but it's important to keep trying. And just because
Mhm.
you set a boundary, it doesn't mean that boundary is set for life. Be open to revisiting that boundary. Boundary may have worked for me in my 20s, again, aging myself, but in my 30s, not so much. And now I'm approaching my 40s literally in a week. And so I'm going to be doing some soul searching and looking back and saying, okay, what have I put into place to help me succeed from here, from 20 to 30, from 30, and what do I need to succeed from 30 to 40? And now what's going to be needed for me to succeed from 40 to 50? And know that it's always an evolution. It's always fluid, nothing's set in stone unless you want it to be. Unless there's like a hard no where it's like, nope, this is never going to change for me. Good for you. Stick to that. But if you can't stick to it, it's okay. Try again, keep trying. And just really listen to yourself. Really take the time to understand and hear what you need. If you're tired, acknowledge that you're tired. Don't take on that extra barbecue. Don't take on that extra dinner, or don't take on an extra activity with your kids. Find another way. Find another outlet. Find something else. But really listen to what you need, because at the end of the day, you're left with your mental health. And your mental health impacts the people around you, whether you want it to or not. It's very much a ripple effect. And so you need to make sure that you are doing everything you can to support yourself, because if you don't, other people won't know how either.
Thank you. I see a comment from Abibi Pierre Jérôme, who mentions that the interesting part when you start having kids is that they tell you that you have too much children. And I find it so very funny because I have 3 kids. The first one says, you should have stopped at 1.
Oh, absolutely.
The second one says, you should have stopped at 2. The third one said, those were just tryouts. So there's this sense where everybody figures out what their role is, and it's easy to tell other people. It's a lot harder to respect when people tell you. And it's also harder for you. For me, the biggest piece about setting boundaries is that I have to ensure that I enforce the boundaries. If I don't enforce my own boundaries, guess what? We're right back to the first gate. And often we'll get, oh, it's okay, it doesn't matter. You don't do it today, go. So you let me slide, not doing it no more. And that's the portion, have to be aware of that. Another, in terms of message, what I would say to people who are having doubts as to how do I go about setting boundaries? How do I manage the reaction and the discomfort and all of those things? There are quite a few good books that are out there that you could read. So you can do a quick Google search. One that I can remember is Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. You can do a search and you'll find it. Really well drafted, and it gives you enough example both at work and at home that can actually help you to make those choices. I also want to remember, or people to remember, a bit like you said, be kind to yourself. And remember that we are all work in progress. I might have tried something, didn't work, then keep working. If it's important for you, you'll have to keep working at it. I see another question, which is any advice on how to not let others make you feel guilty, especially when they try to make it subtle? Because, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. I would say acknowledge the feelings and say, I understand that you're feeling a certain way about me saying this to you, and that's okay. We can always revisit this conversation, but what I need you to hear is how this is making me feel. And it may take, that person may step back, they may shut down, and they may say, well, I don't want to talk about this, and say, that's okay too. But I need you to know that going forward, this is what my expectation is of this topic or of this situation. And really just make your feelings upfront. Like I found that when I don't say what it is that I need, someone else can't give me that because they're not mind readers. They don't know what I need. If I'm not being upfront with what I need and I'm not being upfront with how I feel, I'm setting myself up for failure. I'm setting myself up for damaging a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I'm setting myself up to feel horrible. And so it's taken a long time to change that mindset and say, no, this isn't being selfish. This isn't being rude. This isn't being arrogant. This is telling people how to treat you.
What I would say, if I had to add anything to what you just said, which I love the way you presented it, is that people don't make you feel a certain way. You are making yourself feel a certain way. So there are people who are going to walk all over you and don't think about it for a split second, but then you're going to feel guilty when you say no. The idea is it's about mindset. What
Yeah.
makes me feel guilty and why is it that I feel guilty? So once I flush that out, then I can figure out why is it that my time is less important than somebody else's time. And that's the portion where it's about figuring out what belongs to me. And I know for a friend of mine at one point told me that I had a Shiro complex. And what do you mean? And then when I started looking into it and thinking about it a little more, is just for some reason, I always thought that I had to save the day, the occasion, the situation. And then by doing this, I was preventing people from actually stepping up to the plate.
Mm-hmm.
So that, though it was uncomfortable, I actually learned something about myself where it's just like, you know what? If you want to raise your children to be self sufficient, I cannot run and take care of things on their behalf. I
Absolutely.
cannot say, my kids made me do, because if you're tired, and you cannot go to one more hockey game outside of the city or whatever it is,
Yeah.
then that's for you to know your limits. And it's not for them, but you never go, mom. I went 3 times this year. That's good enough for me. So it's this part. How do I set it out so that I don't let what people say affect me? Not to say that it's not important, but I have to understand why it's
Yeah.
affecting me and why it's creating the stress for me. I remember in the beginning as a parent, especially as a single parent, in my mind, I had to be on 24/7.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you realize my kids are not putting me on 24/7. They only reach out when they need something. So I'm just like, oh, they can figure out what it is that they want. So
Mm-hmm.
why do I have to feel guilty whenever all of a sudden I think of mommy, mommy, can you drop me somewhere? Can you do it? Yeah, no. And that's the portion I have to figure it out. And the question here we see is how do we deal with people who do not respect your boundaries? In my household, and my kids know me, I have 3 strikes, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you 3 times. And by the time I get to the 3rd time, if you haven't understood it, then that means it's my choice
Yeah.
to now decide what I do with you. So it might be, you know what? I thought you were my best friend, then maybe you're just going to drop to an acquaintance. And how
Absolutely.
do we?
Yeah. And how
Yeah.
do you manage that? Because I also find if I'm not listening to if I'm not listening to what I'm feeling, I'm also creating a whole other host of problems. If I'm feeding this hero complex of mine, which I will fully admit I had for years, I might still have some of it, but I
Mhm.
find that that hero complex is a way for me to deflect from my own growth. It's like,
Yeah.
the work I'm doing on myself is too hard. I need to take a break. Let me solve your problem. It seems so much easier than mine. My problem's still there, waiting for me, festering, growing,
Yeah.
as I'm off saving the world for somebody else.
Technically, in the end, setting boundaries is about standing up for yourself.
Yes.
And when people don't respect those, to me, that's sending a message how much you respect me as well.
Yeah.
So it's this part people have to understand. Am I sending the right message by continuing a certain interaction? I remember at one point there was my daughter who had a friend who, oh my dear, I might be revealing things she'd be mad at me about. Okay, so let's switch to another situation. So, because, there's this thing about
I have no boundaries.
anonymity and things like that. But if I remember to another situation that I had when I was a little younger, there was this friend of mine who would go out and often drink a little too much than necessary. And then other people had to figure out how to get her back safe home. Had the conversation a few times, and the person just, you just have to leave me here. I'll figure it out. Don't worry. You always were wondering or making all kinds of consequences for no reason. I'm like, okay. So there was that one time I just said, I'm leaving at such and such. Oh, no, I'm staying. Yeah, but yeah, I'm staying. Okay. So I guess you have money for a cab. Yes. Okay. Left. And then from that moment on, it was so very easy afterwards.
Yeah.
Because that was her choice
Yeah.
to drink. It wasn't my choice to drink. I wasn't her parent. I wasn't her spouse or whichever. It's you make your choice. And there's an expression in my mind that comes to mind, which is you make your bed, you sleep in it.
Absolutely.
So that's it. And I've had to learn in my journey, both at home and at work, that there are times where, you know what, you have to let the people feel their own consequences for them to make the right choice for them. And I have to do the same for me. Because when I wear myself thin trying to take care of everybody else, who's suffering the consequences?
We are.
I am, my family is, my performance is, everything else. So it's being acknowledged, aware of those elements. Thank you.
Thank you
For this conversation. It was a pleasure. I knew you could do it. Have to tell, it's one of those funny things. The first time I met Aneet, what came out to me was that strong personality and very clear, articulate into as to what she needs or what she wants or her opinion. And then when we had later on a conversation about setting boundaries, and she telling me that, oh, I'm still struggling with it. I'm like, this is perfect. Because a lot of us are under the impression that I will do it once or twice and then everything will be perfect and I never have to do it. No. The idea is setting boundaries is a bit like having a difficult conversation. Mm-hmm. Whichever way you look at it, it's always going to be a little uncomfortable.
For sure.
But the more you learn to stand up for yourself, the easier it will become. Because you'll be able to separate what belongs to me and what belongs to others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for the audience who asked questions. And we'll see you next week. Have a great day. Thank you for choosing to be with us.